this episode, I'm going to walk you through creating a Rails project and adding it to Subversion. So let's get started. I'm going to first just create a directory for us to manage our little repository before we import it. So let's make a directory for, let's just call it setup. Go in there. All right. Now I want to create a Rails project here. Just call it Blab. Now you can pretty much do the same steps for a current project if you've already created a project and you just want to add it to Subversion. So let's actually just prepare this new project for Subversion, because there's a few files that I don't want to include in Subversion. So I'm going to remove those files and move them out of the way. The first thing is the database YAML file in the config directory. I don't want to actually keep that in Subversion. So if you have a password in that YAML file, make sure to remove it before importing it into Subversion. For now, I'm going to just move this into a, let's call it database example.yaml, and I don't know why I specified MV here twice. There we go. And a couple other things I don't want to include are the files in the TMP directory and the log file, the temp and log. So let me remove those. Now if you have an existing project, you might want to back these up, I don't know. Okay, so that's pretty much all the files I don't want to include in Subversion. Now there's a little bit more setup here, because if you notice, I just have this blab directory with the project in it. I want to do something which is a good practice for Subversion, which is making branches, tags, and trunk directories. So I'm going to rename this and call it trunk. And I'm also going to make a tags and branches. Now, if you're familiar with Subversion, this should be familiar to you. But if not, you probably just don't have to worry about it. But it's good to include this in case you want to use these structure later on. Okay, so now we have branches, tags, and trunk. Now it's time to import this into our Subversion repository. We do that with svn import, and we want to import the current directory, which is all these files, and then the URL of the Subversion repository. I'm just on my local host, have svn serve running, but this will just be the URL, which is whatever repository you have. And I have the repository for me is just called Blab, and we need to specify the message, just call it initial import, and specify the username, which for me is rbates. And you may need to specify a password like that too. So we successfully added our full project into Subversion. Now all the files that we just created here we don't need anymore, because we're going to check out a new copy of our project from Subversion. We do svn checkout, and then from our local host, and we want to just check out the trunk directory, because that's all I'm interested in right now, and I'm just going to call it blab. So these are checks out all the files, and it includes the little Subversion files in there too, so that it knows the status of all the files and keeps track of everything for us. So we have to work from this new checked out directory now. Now there's a couple things we need to set up. One is copy the database YAML file back. So now we have this new database YAML file, but if you look at svn status here, Subversion's kind of wondering what it should do with this new YAML file. So we need to tell Subversion to ignore it. And to do that, we do svn set prop, svn ignore, and then the name of the file and the directory it's in. Oh, prop set, not set prop. I always get that confused. Prop set. There we go. So now that database YAML file is being ignored. We also need to ignore any files that are added to the temp and trunk directories. I mean, temp and log directories. So let's do that. Ignore all the files in log and ignore all the files in temp. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now we need to commit these changes. So if we look at our status, it's not noticing the database YAML file anymore, and it's just noticing the property changes on those. Let's commit these and say ignoring files. So that we just finished our second commit, and I think our Subversion repository is pretty much up and running now. I'm pretty happy with it. Now you may want to ignore some more files. It's just kind of a personal preference on what you want to include in the repository and what you don't want to. So now we can open up the project in TextMate. And let me show you another thing you can do with Subversion, which is if you're running script generator, let's generate a model here and let's call it item. Now if you generate the files like this, it will Subversion will wonder what to do with all these files that are generated. Unless you pass the -c, the -c option, and this will automatically add it to Subversion while it's generating the files. You can see here the A here. So when we do svn status, we don't get the question marks, we get the A's saying that it will add the files when we do our next commit. And so let's make a change here. Let's maybe add a column. And then migrate our database. And now let's check our Subversion status and notice that it's added a schema.rb file and it's wondering what to do with it. Subversion is. So we need to tell Subversion to add it. Okay. So now we can check in with do our commit and it won't complain and it's going to add all these files for us. I'm just going to show you real quick, and if you're working with TextMate, you can actually use the Subversion bundle in TextMate, which is really useful. You just do Control-Shift-A when you have a file selected, and you get all these different commands you can use for Subversion. I mainly just use commit here, and it gives you a nice little interface which you can difference files and modify them, and submit a message here. Adding the item model. There we go. Successfully done our commits and changes to the database. Let me show you one more thing. If you're installing a plugin and you want to install this, you can pass the -x option. Well, I guess you have to do pass the -x option, which will kind of extract it from Subversion. So this is the proper way to do it if you're using Subversion. So I hope you found this useful. It's how to set up your project with Subversion. Hey, do me a favor and check out our sponsor peepcode.com to make excellent Ruby on Rails screencasts, so it should be right up your alley.